All right, so this autumn I was doing some research for a new book that I'm writing on player leadership within great teams, and I was going through some notes on Anson Dorrance, who had just happened to have retired or stepped down as the head coach of UNC women's program. I say stepped down because he did stay on as an assistant coach this year. Anyways, a name that I heard Dorrance mention time and time again, looking back through my notes and reflecting on my reading, was that of Tracey Bates. And Tracey's leadership while playing at North Carolina and when she was a teammate for the women's national team that won the World Cup in 1991, that Dorrance coach, like, it's legendary, the type of teammate and leader she was. So honestly, I just reached out to her in the fall and I requested an interview for the podcast. And when I was doing that, I kind of realized she actually had just joined back with UNC women's soccer coaching staff. And on top of that, they were about to head into the NCAA tournament. So we, funny enough, actually had this interview booked before they went on to win the national championship, which was obviously quite exciting. But I just share all that because I think it's really important to note that my respect for Tracey does not come from her just winning the national championship, which I think is fantastic. My respect for her comes from her leadership, her care for her teammates, and then now her care for her players as a coach. So today she is actually going to discuss really practically different ways at her different programs and how she's brought her values to life. And the thing I love about Tracey is that she's been in so many different contexts, so she can really speak to, the various, how your coaching changes for your context. Obviously, coaching at UNC is different than coaching at Colby, and coaching at Colby is different than coaching at Northeastern or Arizona State, right? So how she has adapted as a coach to the different contexts, as well as to players today, right? To this newest generation of players, giving them ownership. And she also is going to share a little bit about how she's used Anson Dorrance's competitive cauldron in various teams. So we are excited for the second part of our conversation with Tracey. I know you're going to enjoy it. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nerman. Our mission here is simple. We want to help coaches become better leaders and build better team cultures. And today I'm joined by my co-host Nate Sanderson. Betsy Butterick sat this interview out. If you're interested in learning more about our work as leadership coaches and facilitators, or if you want to explore, get your hands on some online courses and books, head on over to tocculture.com and betsybutterick.com. Be sure to subscribe to our weekly newsletter as well at tocculture.com. It includes the notes to each episode of the podcast. It also shares articles and other podcasts giving you practical tools, ideas, and strategies to build team culture, as well as you get discounts to our latest online courses. I've got to be curious. Do you still do the Cooper Run tests?
No. Oh God, no. My knees say no. I had a spin class this morning, so
there you go.
Trying to preserve my knees. I wish I could.
I just asked because I've had it on my to-do list for about like 4 months now, because I heard it was a really good test for your VO2 max. I heard it's like 99%. And rather than paying for a VO2 max, I've heard the Cooper Run test is really good. And I'm like, I'm going to do it this week. And then I look at it, I'm like, God, it looks so painful. I don't want it. I'm not coming close to that. So that says a lot about your grittiness. That's for sure, that you were like pulling people along on that.
It was pretty painful, I have to say. But it was also like, right from the get-go, it was this test of mental toughness and standard. And that's what Carolina is built on, and that's what every great team, I think, is built on. And so I love that part of it, that you started day one with that, because then you learn the importance of those things, and I just think it's so important about standard and trying to meet and raise that. And I always say, when you have a team that continues to raise it, just like leadership, that's when you really have a special team, that they themselves raise the standard. Because as a coach at the beginning, you're going to do that, right? You're going to push them. But as the team, if they keep raising it, then you have a really special group. At Clemson, I used to run the fitness test with them here and there. And when I was younger, I did. But once I got old, then that was going to be hard.
Maybe you just need to do it on your bicycle. Maybe that's the answer.
There you go, on the spin bike. Exactly. So it's funny that you say the bicycle. We did North Carolina went to Europe one year, and I was raising money to go. And I did like a run-a-thon around the track out here that used to be around our field. And one of my best friends was a baseball player here, and he rode his bike next to me, and I ran for an hour. And it was like at midnight. I was like, "You ready to go?" He's like, "Okay," because I was like, "Okay, I have time now." And he rode his bike next to me, and we chatted, and that was really fun. So, but yeah, I've always felt that's been the best role for me, is a role of kind of helping and supportive and serving. And so that's why it's so great to be back here in the role that I'm in now.
Hmm. I want to transition a little bit here to your coaching experience, and you've had a number of them over the years here. I wonder if you could just sort of from a broad perspective, kind of look back at maybe your first couple of seasons as a coach or in the coaching role, and now where you're at, and maybe how kind of your approach or maybe your philosophies have evolved some over the years with your experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. When I taught my daughter how to drive, I told her, "You'll be surprised." First of all, it was terrifying. Like, I did not want her to drive because I was so nervous. First, I loved the time I spent with her in the car, selfishly.
Hmm.
She was kind of trapped with me because I was driving her everywhere. But then I knew she wanted it so bad. She's very independent, and I was very excited about that. But I was also nervous. Just can be dangerous. Like one, wrong move and one person that you didn't see cross the street, and your whole life changes. So I was also really, really, really nervous. And I told her, "You're going to be surprised as a driver how much better you are every 5 years. You're going to be shocked." And I think the same way as a coach, like when you look back and you look every 5 years, there's so much more growth that you have in front of you, but you also can look back and realize how much you've grown as a coach. So I think as a young coach, and I was lucky because Ray and I were married at the time when I got the Clemson job, and he was more of the experienced coach. And I was coming off my playing days and had played for Anson. So we had this really cool combination of coaching experiences to come together and to kind of merge and to create our own style together. And we always treated every team like as co-coaches. There was no hierarchy or anything like that. We were basically co-coaches together. And we complemented each other really well. I was a little more rigid and structured. He was more abstract and creative. He brought this experience as a coach because he'd been in coaching for 5 or so years. I had no experience other than coaching at the Carolina soccer camps in the summer. But I was coming off playing for someone like Anson. So I think we complemented each other really well. And I was very, very lucky as a young coach that I had that level of experience with me. Because I was really, my biggest weakness as a coach, as a young coach, it was, and I use the word confrontation. I don't even know if that's the best word, but having to tell a player something they didn't like, right? I just never have been that type of person, a confrontational person, or broaching something like that. I was more of the positive, you know, type person. That's what I brought. So I was very, very weak in that, and grew to become much better at it. But again, I think it's a constant thing for me to keep improving. But I think our philosophy and my philosophy, and I think every coach kind of has this, it stems from what you learned and who you played for, partly, until you can create your own and evolve your own. You bring all the experiences that you've had. And so for me, it was always about, hard work, bringing joy to the game, having fun and enjoying what you're doing, really trying to have your team enjoy what they're doing, but also knowing that it's important that they're pushed physically. There are going to be fitness. Soccer is a game of running, and you have to be fit. And so you have to be able to address that part of your team's game, but you could do it in a fun way too. A lot of people that they play for Anson will take everything you did at North Carolina and bring it into their coaching. And I learned very quickly that you could bring pieces of that, but the team that we had was not North Carolina at the time. And it would have been a mistake to treat them like they were North Carolina. Our team at Clemson was our team at Clemson. We were all freshmen. We were beginning. And so we could bring pieces of the North Carolina philosophy, but that didn't fit our team completely to do it like that, to just use that roadmap. And so and that's where Ray's experience came in. You just brought pieces with you. So with me, philosophy for me is just about trying to make it enjoyable, never losing sight that soccer's supposed to be fun, and you're supposed to grow as a person, as a team, and that connection that you're supposed to have, relationship driven, enjoyable experience. Because I think a happy team can be a successful team, and then you're trying to instill the values of hard work and competitive spirit in there. And so I think as a coach, you're trying to just inspire your team to have those qualities. And we were able to do that at Clemson. I think we built our talent up through the years, but at the beginning, we relied on positive energy and passion. And I remember playing April Heinrichs our first year. She was at Maryland and we were at Clemson, and we started the team from scratch. So we had basically all freshmen, plus 2 junior college transfers and a 4-year transfer. Everyone else was freshmen. We're playing in the ACC, the toughest conference in the country. Our first game was against North Carolina. We lost 7-0. But we learned a lot from that game. And we approached, I think, in the right way, where it contributed to wins later. We were in the top 20 and we made the national tournament and all these great things. We ended playing Maryland, and I remember April, we won the game, and April at the end of the game said, "What do you guys feed your team? What do you feed your team?" Because our kind of staple was passion, positive energy, just that feel of loving what you're doing and putting everything out there, playing hard for one another. And so I loved when people would say that, because that meant we were doing something right. And so we built our program at Clemson on that quality, as we were trying to implement and raise the standard more and more every year as we got more players, more talented players, but also, leaders and elder players and things like that.
Yeah, and what you're talking about now, you kind of mentioned earlier, which is like bringing your values to life. Like you seem to talk a lot about this, competitive spirit and hard work and joy or fun. And I could ask you, and you could share, like, what are your core values if you have them with when you had a team. But I'm actually way more interested in how you just brought your values to life so that they became that identity, that they just played to that identity. How do you, from, like you said, I'm sure you did some things that Anson did, but you started to find your own way that was true to you and would work for your players. What was that process to when it comes to building culture and bringing those values to life?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great question. I mean, as anything in coaching, and I think in life, this is an evolution, really. And I think the art of it is to figure out with the group that you have, where you are, what's going to be the best for that group. And how can you evolve that through the years? And, there's different philosophies, and it's really, there's no wrong answer to it, because every group is different. The dynamic of the group is always different, whether it's you looking at your team year to year or me looking at my team and a competitor looking at their team, First, it's getting the clear set of values, and there's different ways of doing that can all work with your team. One could be you're carrying it down from one generation to the next, which is what it is like here at Carolina. These are our core values, and you will learn them, you will memorize them, and you will live by them. With my teams, probably previous to North Carolina, we would meet every preseason, and then we would have the team decide their core values for that team. Because I always felt like if the team had ownership in it, they were more apt to follow that. Instead of being told, if they had ownership to say, what core values do we want to have with this particular team? You try as a coach to align that with the growth of your program. So before going into those meetings, I would have what I think our core values should be too. Like as a staff, we would meet. What do we want to have as core values too? So because we're in charge of growing the program. But I think if the players feel that ownership, that they can say, all right, let's break up into 4 or 5 different groups, a big, Post-it that you're hanging up on the wall with a pen, and you're writing what you think our core values should be. And then we're diving into what those look like, and I think that's the next step. So you might say, okay, accountability is a core value. What does that look like? So accountability is this idea in players' heads. And I think, okay, what does that look like? Tell me what that is, what it means, what does it look like? And then they start going, okay, it's making sure we go to treatment. It's making sure that we do our recovery, our warm down stretch, like their behaviors. And I think that's the next step in terms of trying to make sure that your team lives those. When you put up accountability and team chemistry and work ethic and whatever your values are, honesty, the next step is, what does that look like? Because then you're talking about behaviors, and behaviors are what you're going to hold the team accountable for. And so I think when the team thinks in that way and you write it up, let's see what it looks like. We make sure as coaches, hey, if they're missing a core value, hey, what about this idea? Because we want to get ours in there too, because we want to grow the program, and so we come up together with a set of core values, and what does it look like? So, and we kept it on the wall all season so that they know. So if they're not going to treatment and it's written right in the locker room, we can say, all right, you're not being accountable. This is what our team has decided, and you're not doing this. And so a lot of people will say, write down things. If you want to have a goal, write it down, and then write down what you do each day and have a plan. And so I think when you put those in writing and you post those and you put down what behaviors support that, the team is more apt to have ownership of that, to hold each other accountable, and then you're able to step in and do the same on an easier platform.
Yeah. There's so many things I appreciate in that. One is, I know you said earlier, you kind of feel like you're a little bit more structured and a little bit more rigid as a coach, but I also see a lot of flexibility within you to adapt to your teams. And I think that's really, really fantastic. I like how you've talked about a process of deciding core values. I often, more so with the teams I work with now, it's almost like an unearthing of like what's really important about who we want to become here. And I love, you talk about aligning behaviors with that. I think even too, it's about aligning what type of thinking will we have? What type of beliefs will we have? If we valued selflessness, how might we think about our teammates? How might we think about these things, not just even behave? But I think you're spot on really getting them to identify that, so you can hold them accountable to that. How are you within your teams revisiting those values throughout the season within practices and games?
Well, it's funny. We, once the core values are set, then you hope the leaders then grab those, right? And start to hold their teammates accountable. Certainly in trainings, we're holding the team accountable in certain ways. If an exercise isn't good enough, stop it, address it, fix it, solve problems, maybe what we can do better, ask the players, hey, what can we do better? Again, that ownership, I think, is so important, kind of that guided discovery, not just being told, but learning in that way and making them solve problems, but then demanding that it gets better. And so I think as a coach, I think you're constantly kind of doing that. And then you're also applauding when it is great. I think that's just as important as trying to raise the standard, is applauding when they've met it, really applauding the team and praising the team. But yeah, I think, the players holding themselves accountable from this list is just vital, Remind me again what you're asking.
Yeah, I just curious how you revisit them,
Revisit. Okay.
yeah, how do you come back to them? And,
Yeah,
you obviously want to make them go beyond just walls on or words on a wall or a t-shirt, like you got to really bring them to life,
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I remember at Colby, my last season there, we started out really well. Everyone's gung ho. We've got our values, right? Everyone's doing great because it's the beginning, right? And then as school starts and you get more tired and, roles are becoming more apparent and, just the stressors come on with the players and such. You get into the games and traveling and everything else. It's easy to kind of start to fall by the wayside. And so I think we met a lot with our leadership group. So we had a leadership group. Tried to stay in constant touch with them every week or two, to make sure, how's everybody doing? Let's have a check-in, let's have a touch point, have individual touch points as a coach with players, but also make sure that the leaders were staying on top of it, like meeting with the leadership group. And we had a really great leadership group there at Colby. I remember midway through the season, we weren't feeling like accountability was something we were doing. And that was one of the biggest focuses that we had from the spring also into the fall. And so we had to revisit it. We had to go in the locker room and have them stare at that sign and say, we're not doing this. We're not doing this. And it starts with each individual not being accountable themselves, right? You can't expect anyone, you can't demand that from anyone else if you're not going to do it yourself. And so it was about meeting and having just a little wake-up call. We also did it with our stats. So we were letting up a lot of set piece goals. And I said, that's accountability. That's accountability. So anything that you're not doing off of the field, by the way, shows up on the field. And this is what's happening. It's not happening off the field. It's not happening on the field because we're not prioritizing it. And let me factually explain that to you. Data, right? We've let up this many goals. This is how many corners. This is how many set pieces. And it was pretty astounding. And I said, this is not by accident. But we can fix this. We can fix this easily by being more accountable ourselves, understanding your role on set pieces. That's accountability. Making sure at practice we're focusing on those things, making sure we're picking up the balls, being accountable in that way so our leaders aren't always doing it, and so on and so forth. So to me, like, everything affects everything else,
Yeah.
And so we had to have a meeting, almost like a come to Jesus meeting, like a reset meeting, and say, how do you feel we're doing? This is how we're feeling. We're not meeting this right here. Let me tell you why.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can encourage your leaders to do that, and have a leaders only meeting. But I think our leaders at that point were getting frustrated because it wasn't impacting.
Yeah. So you had to kind of step into that situation.
They were trying.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were trying.
I'm curious how you feel about, and I've got kind of two questions, one question here, another question, and maybe Nate has another question as well too, before we finish up here, but just two things that your former coach, Anson Dorrance, used to do that I think sometimes supported that peer accountability that many people would say are a little bit controversial, the competitive cauldron and peer evaluations, right? Where, he would have players ranked based upon their wins and losses and practices with competitive cauldron. And then he'd also have you guys evaluate each other based upon these core values and these behaviors. How are those things that you ever used? Like you said, there's different approaches for different teams for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a huge believer in peer evals, actually. We picked our captains that way, So instead of just showing up and like writing a name on a piece of paper where it takes like 5 seconds, I used to get frustrated. We would do captain's votes and it would take them no time. I'm like, did they even think about it? Like, it was so fast. I'm like, this is so important. But it stemmed from how we addressed it too. So it wasn't just the play, it was our system of doing it that was actually the problem. It was the players didn't have to think, about these qualities. So we would do a peer eval on leadership qualities, 10 leadership qualities, and everyone would rate everybody else. And we would, gather all the numbers and all the data. That's how we picked our leadership group. And then the top vote getters, when there was a gap, would be our captains. And that's how we picked both. What's nice is we were able to share with our leaders according to your team, these are your areas of strength, and these are the areas that you need to grow in according to your team. As a group of leaders, this is the area of strength. This is the area where we need to grow in.
Mm-hmm.
You could also share that with every player, because you want everyone to aspire to be a leader, right? So with every player, you could say, these are areas that you were strong in, according to your team, not us. And this is areas that you can grow in. And so to me, we did that one year at Northeastern with competitiveness, because I felt we needed to become more competitive. So we did a peer eval on it. They rated themselves coming into the meeting. And then this is what your teammates think, and this is what we think as coaches. And pretty much ours were close to what the team felt. So we use peer evals a lot. We did it at Northeastern, we did it at Colby, picking leaders and captains and things like that. So I like peer evals a lot, because the players see them in so many other settings than you do as a coach. You could be completely off base about a player too. Like you can think, oh my God, this player is living all these core values, but yet, maybe their behavior off the field doesn't align with that, and you don't see them in that way. You might not see them during that time. So I think as a coach, it can be educational so that you can help that player in times that you don't see them, So I like peer evals a lot. I think you have to present those in the right way and based on where your team is, because they can also be, I think, detrimental to your team if you don't approach it in the right way. Sometimes it might be information just for you. And this is what we did at Clemson with the competitive cauldron. We kept track of things, but we didn't always share it, because we didn't think it was right for our team, where we were, to always post everything, but we could keep it as coaches. We might post things occasionally. We might post the fitness results, and that's it. So you can decide how to address that information based on your team, where they are, what growth you want to see, and the best way to do it so that there's positive results. You don't want to be counterproductive. So had we posted everything at Clemson and made it a competitive cauldron like we did here at North Carolina, our team would not have gone well. We just weren't ready for that. And it wouldn't have been the best way to coach our team there.
It's about knowing your players, right? At the end of the day,
Mhm.
sometimes we do very similar things. A lot of teams I work with on leadership group selection, sometimes, we're taking the core values and they're ranking players on who best represents that values. And then sometimes, like recently with the team I'm working with here in Ireland, it was just more of scoring them, because even I thought of ranking against other girls at that point, just I sensed was not what they needed. It's just the intentionality of hey, there's still value in these. And I think sometimes people throw these things out because they're like, oh, peer evaluations, that would turn everybody against each other. It's like, well, how are you doing that? Competitive cauldron. Are you sharing it, not sharing it? There's just them knowing that you're tracking it, but not making it public. I mean, there's different ways to go about doing these things, because there's a lot of value in them, because like you said earlier, they help bring truth to these players, right?
Right. And when you're talking about self-awareness, and also self-awareness as a team, where do you fit as a team? You want to have that too. I think these things can help, but you do have to, I think there's information that you can pull out of it based on your group. So you could say, hey, these are the top 5 players that came out of this competitive cauldron, or these are the 5 that improved the most. These are the 5 players that improved the most. So you're trying to touch on everybody. It's not always the Mia Hams of the world that are so talented and the best at so many things as a player, that name is always being drawn out. Maybe it's the most improved, maybe it's players at that day of practice that came out on top of the cauldron, and you want to voice that. So you're able to be really inclusive in those results. And I think that's, again, the art of knowing your team and knowing how to use this information in the proper way to help your team and to help each individual player.
Well, Tracey, we'll get you out of here on this. I'm curious, in your transition from such a long playing career and now into a coaching career, was there anything that surprised you about coaching, or anything that you felt like, boy, I really didn't expect that, or I wasn't ready for that?
It's funny because I've said this even the last 3 or so years. Coaching's hard. It's hard, you know? I think a lot of people have this view that it's great. There's so many great things about it, obviously. But it's hard, it's a challenging profession. It's basically like a teacher, right? You're a teacher on the soccer field. Like teaching is hard too, you're working with young women or young men, in some cases very young, and you're trying to pull out the best of them, and they're coming from all different backgrounds, and all have different areas of strength and weakness or things to improve, all have different levels of motivation. Right, and you're trying to create your own team and get everyone on one page. That's hard to do. And I remember saying that when I left coaching for a while, like in terms of college coaching, and then came back to it, I realized coaching's hard, So I think that's what surprised me the most. But I also think there's so much reward to it. And I think that equally surprised me too, like it's hard and there's a grind, to it. But man, there's so many rewards to it. When you have a player thank you, or you get such a nice note, or you win a championship, or you beat a team you've never beaten, right? Or you close the gap on a team and you still lose, but you lost 5-0 and then you lost 1-0 and maybe you outplayed them. Whatever the cases may be, I think that also surprised me, is that feeling of reward, and that you're making a difference as well. And I always knew as a coach the impact you can have because of the coaches I had. My father passed when I was young, so they were like my father. They were like my father. They were always huge impacts in my life. Anson gave me away at my wedding. So they were always, soccer was so important to me, and that was who I was, that my coach filled that void and really always was special to me. So I knew that impact it had on me, and it was exciting to try and have that impact on others, and to do the best you can to have it on everyone you coach.
I'm going to have to get one more question for you. But you guys just won the national championship, and every coach is going to want to know, how the heck did they do it? What was like the thing about that you did culturally that helped you get across the finish line? I mean, North Carolina hadn't won since 2012, I believe, right? Was the last time you won the national championship. Yeah. So if there's just one thing that you did culturally that you just felt like helped bring this team together to make it special, what was that one thing?
I think it was the right combination of people, the people, the players, the character of those players was high. The leadership was incredible. And they truly, like, you always want your team to really care about one another. It was so genuine. The support was so genuine. And that carried out all the way on the field, all the way onto the field, where I had a fan come up to me one time and say, "Man, your team really loves each other. I could see it." And I was like, "Oh my God, that's so awesome." And because of that, they were able to get through trials and tribulations, ups and downs, challenges within the team, hard losses, victories, keep that in perspective, because at the end of the day, they knew they had each other's back and they could count on one another. And I think they knew that the staff was the same.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast, Tracey.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that's it for our interview with Tracey Leone. We discussed with Tracey the competitive cauldron. And if you want to implement a competitive cauldron within your team, I highly suggest you check out my course and our actually competitive cauldron spreadsheet. If you're a subscriber to the TOC newsletter, you're going to get a coupon for $25 off this online course. So that's just another great reason to subscribe to the newsletter. You get these discounts off courses, as well as you're getting the notes to each episode of the podcast and our weekly articles. Thanks for listening in to the Coaching Culture Podcast.